Last month, I played Elden Ring non-stop. I've beaten the game 4 times now, and got all achievements for it. Never played a Souls game before Elden Ring, but I'm glad I started with this one. The game's been out for a while now, and I don't really have anything compelling to say about it that hasn't already been said by other people on the internet. So how about I just go over my favorite bosses? I'll even make it like a top 5 list or whatever. Number 5. Elden Ring is full of dragons. You have the one in Liurnia you have to sneak past to get the Glintstone key, the one in Limgrave that jump scares you by swooping into the Agheel ruins, and many others. In my opinion, I think Dragonlord Placidusax, or however the hell you pronounce that name, is the coolest of the dragon bosses. He has those red lightning claws, he teleports by turning into ash and rematerializing somewhere else, that one attack where he swoops in to hit you is really cool, he eventually starts spewing freaking lasers instead of fire when his health is low, then there's that one attack where he makes a miniature nuke that cuts the music out. The setting and music are also really good. I love how you go back in time to fight the guy. The small amount of lore they put in for Placidusax makes him even cooler. All the game says is he was Elden Lord before the Erd Tree, and when his god left, he awaited their return by sleeping outside of time. There are just so many unanswered questions here. What was everything like before the Erd Tree showed up? How does a dragon become Elden Lord? Who was Placidusax's god? Why is he missing his other heads? Whatever his backstory is, it's probably really cool. All in all, Placidusax is definitely the coolest dragon in Elden Ring. Number 4. By the time I finished the game, I already had 4 favorite bosses in mind, Placidusax being one of them, but I couldn't really think of another one. Then it hit me. The Crucible Knight from the Stormhill Evergaol. Yeah, he was a super tough boss for beginner me at the start. Felt awesome finally beating him. Okay, I'm kidding. That Crucible Knight felt a little less special when I found regular enemy versions of him later in the game. Who I'm actually putting in the number 4 spot is Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon. Rennala is one of my favorite bosses, not because of the mechanics of the fight, but the presentation. This is probably one of the best looking fights in Elden Ring. Dark library filled with these creepy pale schoolgirls that crawl around and sing lullabies with Rennala floating above you, seemingly without a care in the world. Then there's the second phase where you're running around the surface of an endless ocean with the moon in the horizon. The visuals for this fight are superb. Not to mention the music for each phase is perfect. This battle was a spectacle. I kind of sucked at the actual fight though. This was my 3rd major boss encounter, so I was still a little inexperienced. Hell, I still had a heavy equip load when I got to this point in the game because I didn't realize the unused halberd that came with the Vagabond class was weighing me down. I was essentially still a noob. First phase wasn't bad since it wasn't much of a fight. Just whack 3 schoolgirls to bring a defenseless Rennala down, then pummel her till she's out of health. The second phase is what I sucked at. I really struggled to avoid her spells, especially with that heavy equip load. I eventually gave in and used my Lone Wolf Spirit Ashes to cheese the fight. It was my first time ever summoning spirits. They overwhelmed her so much she couldn't even summon spirits of her own. I did eventually redeem myself by beating her without Spirit Ashes in a later playthrough. Might be a bit strange that I'm putting Rennala in the number 4 spot when I didn't even originally consider her one of my favorites, but when I look back on it, she's connected with some of the most memorable moments in the game for me. I remember finally finishing Stormveil Castle. I walk out the back exit after beating Godric, and I'm presented with Liurnia. By that point, I had explored a majority of Limgrave and Caelid. Those areas were already pretty big, so I was worried there wouldn't be much left. The initial shot when you walk out of Stormveil Castle completely dispelled any worries I had. The world roughly doubled in size there, and I was stoked. I couldn't wait to explore all of Liurnia, but I was most intrigued by that ominous castle in the distance, which I'd later find out is the Academy of Rhea Lucaria. The Academy is probably my favorite dungeon in the game, way better than Stormveil Castle, Volcano Manor, and so on. It's just such a cool setting. I enjoyed exploring every inch of this once great magical school. The fact that I didn't even know I'd be fighting Rennala at the end of the dungeon made her encounter more memorable, as well as the lead up to it. Anyway, Rennala is a great character, her fight is visually and aurally stunning, the lead up to her is great, plus she gets bonus points for being one of the few characters in the game to survive after you beat her. Number 3. Margit the Fell Omen. Yes, the first real Elden Ring boss is among my favorites. I remember reaching the Gatefront ruins, riding Torrent through all those soldiers and barricades, checking out that shack with Roderica in it, following the stone path all the way to that tunnel guarded by more soldiers, then getting pummeled by Margit on that bridge. I'm sure almost everyone experienced this the same way. After losing to the guy maybe 10 times initially, beginner me realized he needed to do some more exploring of Limgrave, and eventually Caelid, before he was ready to take Margit on. Once I reached around level 30, I went back to fight him. I don't know if that was the best choice in the end, because I proceeded to die even more times than I did previously. I think I was on this fight for maybe 2 hours before I eventually beat him. Defeating Margit shocked me so much, I completely forgot to record the fight, so the gameplay I've been showing is actually my first attempt at fighting Margit on my second playthrough. Even though I died to him so many times on my first run, I never got mad. I just had a big goofy smile on my face every time he said, Margit's a fair boss. Moves are well telegraphed, openings to attack are clear, his second phase adds another layer of difficulty that feels reasonable, then he has those moments where he can punish you when you think you're safe to attack, which only makes the fight more immersive. If you read into Margit's lore, you'll see he's a pretty tragic character. I guess I can try to summarize his story as concisely as I can, but I might get some stuff wrong. The game later reveals Margit as Morgott, the Omen King. He's the son of Queen Marika and Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. Unfortunately, Morgott was born an Omen, which is why he has all those horns on his face. Although Morgott was of royal blood, being born an Omen was seen as a curse, which led to his confinement in the depths of Leyndell sewers, where the rest of the Omens lived. Despite this curse essentially making him an outcast despised by all, Morgott didn't really have any hatred in his heart, and just wanted acceptance. So, that's why he's so dedicated to protecting the Erd Tree and stopping any and all from trying to become Elden Lord. I think that's a decent summarization. When you get to the foot of the Erd Tree, you face off against Morgott one last time. It was a pretty cool fight, but I think the initial Margit fight was better. Besides, getting hit by his cane felt a lot more impactful than his sword. His backstory, his dialogue, the voice acting, his fights, it's all great stuff. I'd say Morgott is my favorite character in Elden Ring. I just couldn't help but feel sorry for the guy when I beat him in Leyndell, and watched as he spoke to me with his dying breath.
Thy deeds shall be met with failure, just as I.
So yeah, the first fight against Morgott as Margit is one of my favorite Elden Ring bosses. It was a fun surprise fighting him again in the capital outskirts where he possessed a random NPC, and his battle at the foot of the Erd Tree was cool, but I liked his initial encounter the most, and it's probably because my many deaths against him made it an incredibly memorable boss battle. Number 2. The Fire Giant. This may seem like a strange choice to some, but hear me out. Fights against large enemies in Elden Ring tend to be a lot less flashy since all you can really do is hit their legs. A lot of action ends up off camera. Defeating enemies this way also seems a bit far-fetched. Like, did I really kill this massive dragon by just poking its foot 100 times? For the Fire Giant, however, there's an actual reason to target his legs, or at least one of them. When the fight begins, you'll see he has a makeshift splint on his left leg. He injured it at some point, and it's still healing. It'd be a shame if some little person with a sword came in and started hitting it. After a few hits, the splint breaks, and the giant continues fighting without it, which isn't the best idea because at half health, his leg fully breaks. That mid-fight cutscene's raw as hell. The Fire Giant literally rips his broken leg off and incinerates it. His backstory makes him a pretty sympathetic character too, even though he isn't a major character. Worried the fire from their forge could burn the Erd Tree, Queen Marika began a war against the giants, killing off the entire species. Only this giant remained, and Marika cursed him to forever guard the forge, ensuring no one could ever use it to burn the Erd Tree. That's the only reason the Fire Giant's fighting us. I'm sure he'd love for us to harness the forge's flame and burn the Erd Tree, considering it's the reason he's the sole survivor of his race, but the curse just can't allow it. On the second phase though, I like to think he's not just fighting for the forge, but for his own life. You can really see the desperation in his attacks during this phase. He's throwing everything he has, and just wants the fight to be over with. People tend to complain about his rolling in the second phase, and I guess it was a bit annoying, but that's just the Fire Giant trying to survive against you. In the end, aren't you technically doing the same thing in every other fight? You're low on health, so you start panic rolling away to prolong your inevitable death? Again, the Fire Giant was not a major character. But the setting, his story, his sheer size, all these factors make this a pretty grandiose fight. He's also not that difficult either. His attacks are well telegraphed and easy to avoid. Even if the movements are off-screen like they tend to be in the first phase, you have a pretty good idea of when to roll. The fight's really just an endurance round. The fire giant has a ton of health, and the longer the fight goes on, the more likely you're bound to get hit by one of his attacks. The music's also spectacular. It just makes the fight even better. Before I get to my number 1 favorite Elden Ring boss, rather than do honorable mentions, I'll quickly do a top 5 least favorite bosses. Number 5. Starscourge Radahn. Of all the bosses in this video, this is the only one whose fight I did not record at all. What I'm playing right now is a clip of someone cheesing the fight with the Rotten Breath incantation. It's exactly what I did because I could not stop dying to this guy. Although I felt accomplished beating him this way, it wasn't very impressive, which is why I didn't record it. Even with Rotten Breath, I still died several times to Radahn because you have to be right in his face for the spell to even connect. Like the clip playing right now, I also just summoned all the NPCs available to keep Radahn distracted. I'm definitely being unfair, but my experience is blinding me. You start like a mile away from Radahn, the game encourages you to summon NPCs by putting the summon signs right next to you when you start, his boss arena takes up like a sixth of Caelid. All this just made me think, okay, this is clearly a very difficult fight. I definitely won't be able to handle this in a traditional one-on-one. So, those were my thoughts on the Radahn fight before my 4th playthrough. On my 4th playthrough, I actually decided to solo him, and it actually wasn't that bad. It was on Journey 3, and I was exactly level 200, so I likely had it easy. Regardless, it wasn't really difficult to avoid his moves. If I hadn't been so intimidated by literally everything about the fight, I probably would have been able to solo Radahn on my first playthrough. Number 4. Mohg, Lord of Blood. You know, Mohg is probably one of the most fair bosses in the game, but I don't know, I got sick of the guy after dying to him so much. He's super bulky, and it took forever to get him to half health when I was fighting him for the first time with the straight sword and shield. Then there's that part where he casts those 3 rings on you and greatly replenishes his health halfway into the fight while depleting yours. He regains so much of his health too, it's like you didn't even make any progress. The fact that you need to hunt down a crystal tear that was specifically made to make this part of the fight more manageable is honestly kind of dumb. Hell, even with the effect active after drinking the physic, you still take a bit of damage, so it's impossible to do a no damage fight with Mohg unless you're incredibly overpowered and take him out before he can even pull the move off. The second phase is a bit like the first, except now, pretty much all his attacks spew that bloody fire. The whole arena gets covered in this crud. It gets overwhelming fast, which leads to my death super early into the second phase. Then I have to go through the whole first phase all over again. It wouldn't have been so bad if I could just take him down quicker, but I wasn't doing enough damage with my standard build. I actually forgot to record the stupid fight on my first playthrough. It wasn't very impressive anyway. I just got him to half health and used my Mimic tier in the second phase. The gameplay on screen is from my second playthrough, where I went with a dual katana build. The fight was significantly easier this way. Who knew the Lord of Blood would be so susceptible to blood loss? Then I just used my Mimic tier for the second phase, and it was no problem. I was a bit reluctant to fight Mohg on my 4th playthrough, but I decided to do it to see if I thought he was harder to solo than Radahn. In my opinion, I think he is. I tried using my straight sword and shield like I did in my first encounter, but I eventually got fed up and switched back to dual katanas, the first time I ever used a different weapon in my 4th playthrough. I did, however, manage to beat Mohg without the Mimic tier, so I technically did redeem myself there. Number 3. Godfrey, First Elden Lord. Godfrey is an okay boss. His first phase is actually quite easy. My only issue is his dumb second phase, where he devolves into Hoaraloo. He just never lets up in this phase. He's constantly rushing you with his gigantic hands and never gives you any breathing room. What's that? A single hit took a little over half your health and you want to take a sip of your flask? Nope, screw you, get grabbed. Speaking of his grabs, they're annoying too. I struggled way too much to avoid them because they're so delayed. It was just so annoying dying so early in the second phase. I pretty much had his first phase down, but after a while, the gamer fatigue started to kick in, where even though I got good at his first phase, I slowly began getting worse the more I lost, and a majority of my attempts began ending in the first phase. By the time I got to this fight, I was kind of already burned out from the other late game bosses, so after maybe the 7th failed attempt to survive his second phase, I said, screw this, and summoned Nefeli to give me a hand. Did I feel bad for cheesing him like this? Well, at the time, of course not. I was sick of Godfrey. Like Radahn and Mohg, I eventually soloed Godfrey on my 4th playthrough. Do I still feel the same way about Godfrey after the fact? Yeah, I still think the fight's a bit ridiculous. His first phase was actually a lot easier than I remembered. There were even attempts where I didn't take damage during this phase at all. Of course, I died quite a bit to his second phase. I managed to die pretty quickly too. There were only 3 attempts where I survived more than 20 seconds into the second phase. I had actually fought Godfrey's first phase so much, I grew confident enough to ditch my shield and two-hand my sword to get to his second phase faster. Earlier, I said Godfrey never lets up when he's Hoaraloo, but I probably said that because I wouldn't survive the fight long enough to see the rest of his behavior. Now that I've fought him again, I'll revise that statement. He's relentless when on the offensive, but usually gives you enough breathing room to heal or punish between his bursts of aggression. My strategy for the second phase was to stay away from him as often as possible, only getting close when I was confident I could get a hit in without being punished. Obviously, I got hit, and grabbed, quite a few times, but I eventually beat him this way. Again, the fight's a bit ridiculous, but I'll be honest, I kind of had a blast fighting him without help.
Faith tarnished. Thy strength is its crown.
Number 2. Malenia, Blade of Miquella. Yup, you guys probably saw this one coming. I died to Malenia more times than I did to any other boss I encountered in the game, and 90% of those deaths were from the first phase alone. Malenia's attacks in the first phase are actually not too bad. Her standard slashes are easy enough to avoid, and her more hard-hitting attacks are well telegraphed, also easy to avoid, and pretty punishable. Only 2 of the attacks in her arsenal are annoying. The first of these 2 attacks is the one where she charges towards you and does 3 slashes. This move sucks for 2 reasons. Reason 1. It's difficult to roll away from because they designed the 3rd slash of the flurry to stretch out farther than the rest, so you're almost guaranteed to get hit at least once from this part of the attack if you didn't get far enough away. What you're supposed to do is roll into her side to avoid the 3 slashes, but there were times I just wasn't ready for the attack and instinctively rolled back. Reason 2. The 4th slash. Like I just said, all you have to do is roll into her side to avoid the attack, but it isn't over. She does one more slash after the flurry, and it can be delayed. If it is delayed, then you can roll accordingly and safely punish. If it isn't, then she does something else immediately afterward. She'd usually do that one move where she does an uppercut followed by a slam. I got hit by that uppercut part pretty often because the move comes out way too quickly. Sometimes, I'd just get hit by that 4th slash because it also comes out way too quickly. Malenia honestly doesn't give you enough time to determine if it's going to be delayed or not. The second of her 2 awful first phase attacks is one most players who fought her will remember, Waterfowl Dance. This is her worst attack. Malenia jumps into the air, stays there briefly, then unleashes a million slashes around her while charging the player. She does this in 3 bursts, but if you're caught in any of them, you're pretty much dead. My initial strategy was to run as far as possible the second I realized she was going to pull off the move. That way, I could avoid the first burst. What I'd do next is block the second burst with my shield. She'd pretty much fly over me for the 3rd, and I wouldn't be hit at all. This proved to be a really bad strategy because Malenia does not give you enough time to run away. I got caught in the first burst almost every time she did the move. Not only that, but she heals every time she lands a hit. Did I forget to mention that? Yeah, she heals every time she lands a hit. It doesn't even matter if you're blocking with your shield, she heals regardless. This was the first fight in the game that made me change my playstyle. I was strictly a medium shield straight sword guy, but after I kept dying to Malenia's first phase, I realized I needed a way to dish out more damage than she could heal. So, I thought it would be a great idea to dual wield straight swords. In my right hand, I had a maxed out Sword of Night and Flame, and in the left, I had a maxed out Carrion Knight Sword. This was actually a pretty effective strategy. It actually got me to the second phase of the fight after maybe 3 tries with it. Of course though, I died immediately when the second phase began. I then proceeded to die to the first phase for the next few hours, only managing to get to her second phase once more before I made yet another change to my strategy. So, the Elden Ring wiki suggested using the Rivers of Blood katana, as its unique skill, Corpse Piler, was really effective against Malenia. Why is that? Well, because it builds up a status effect known as Blood Loss, which I briefly mentioned when I talked about Mohg earlier. Various weapons, skills, and spells can cause blood loss buildup, and if you've been playing Elden Ring, you'll notice a few enemies in the game do it to you, most notably those annoying imps and catacombs. When this meter is full, you get the blood loss effect, which deals a decent chunk of damage, usually more than your standard attacks do. That was the strategy for this fight against Malenia. Blood loss would most definitely outpace her healing if she managed to land any hits. Since I had been dual-wielding straight swords, I decided to dual-wield katanas. I had actually found another katana earlier in the game, the Uchigatana, and decided to pair it with the Rivers of Blood one. On top of that, I added the Bloodhound Staff Ashes of War to the Uchigatana, which allowed me to easily avoid her waterfowl dance. With this new technique, I still died quite a bit to the first phase, but I was doing way better against Malenia than I had been previously. Now I was actually reaching the second phase more frequently. Speaking of the second phase, it's terrifying. Not only does she grow wings and get naked, but she uses a couple new moves that scare the hell out of me, and on top of healing every time she hits you, she causes Scarlet Rot buildup with some of her attacks. She retains her first phase moveset, but she's still tough. It's even worse when you realize Malenia has a completely new health bar in the second phase. You could argue Rennala also has separate health bars for each phase, but that's different because her first phase is trivial. That's not even a fight when you compare it to Malenia's first phase. Malenia is missing a chunk of health at the beginning of the second phase, and I'm not really sure why, but it's basically a full health bar. Anyway, I kept dying to Malenia's second form, and finally said, screw it, summon the Mimic Tier. Took maybe an entire day to beat her, but I'd say it was time well spent. I'm glad I didn't get the collector's edition of this game, because I most likely would have shattered that Malenia statue after beating her. Just another way to show her who's boss, you know? I can't do it! Like Radahn, Mohg, and Godfrey, I mustered up the courage to solo Malenia in my 4th playthrough. I first tried fighting her with the straight sword and shield, then 2 straight swords, and eventually just switched back to the dual katanas method. This time though, I actually paid attention to stats and stuff. I even experimented with affinities. At one point, I added frost to both katanas to inflict both frostbite and blood loss. Although it was effective, I quickly switched to blood affinities because the frost affinity did lower the blood loss buildup quite a bit. I also paid attention to attribute scaling for the first time. I noticed my katanas had a B scaling for dexterity, so I went to Rennala to get reborn and allocated quite a few points to dexterity. That was the first time I ever did rebirth too. Anyway, here's what I learned from this second fight against Malenia. That one attack where she charges towards you and does 3 slashes? Trivial. I learned to just roll away from her when she did the 4th slash. That way I didn't have to worry about the possibility of it not being delayed. Even if it was delayed, I'd have enough time to run back in and punish. I also learned I got completely lucky when I used Bloodhound Step on my first playthrough. Look at this. I was mashing L2 on my controller there, and it actually worked. It was not working at all for me this time. I was literally dying to Malenia's waterfowl dance every single attempt. However, I eventually found a solution, one that actually worked 100% of the time. So, when you realize Malenia is about to do waterfowl dance, immediately start running away. This ensures you completely avoid her first burst. Just as she's about to do the second burst, use Bloodhound Step to dash into her, and she'll completely miss you. Finally, for her third burst, you want to dash into her again, but start spamming Bloodhound Step for the remainder of the burst. Depending on where she moves, the camera can jerk around and make you dash into a less than optimal spot. So, spamming it ensures you don't get hit at all. If I ever did get hit by her waterfowl dance at any point, it was because of misinput or a delayed reaction. If you're ready for the attack and follow the method exactly, you should be able to avoid it entirely. I also learned her second phase isn't as bad as I originally thought. Like I said, she maintains her original moveset, but has a few new attacks, most of which are straightforward to avoid. One of her new attacks was a bit scarier than Waterfowl Dance though. It's the one where she fires off these phantom versions of herself, each one trying to hit you. Once they're all done, Malenia ends the attack by trying to hit you herself. It was easy enough to avoid the first couple phantoms, but the first phantom that does a thrust instead of a slice is just way too fast to dodge. That one ghost always killed me in the attack. It's definitely her worst move in the second phase, but I eventually found a workaround. Start running away from Malenia when she jumps up to begin the attack. Just as the first ghost is about to hit you, start spam rolling away. You'll avoid the first couple ghosts, and because you've gotten so far away at this point, the more aggressive ghosts at the end of the attack won't be able to reach you, and this includes Malenia herself. Just keep rolling to be safe though. So yeah, with enough attempts and a good enough understanding of her moves, I finally soloed her without a Mimic Tear. The fight is definitely a nightmare, but I'll admit, it was pretty fun. There's one thing I'll never forget about this battle, and it's that I was fighting Number 1. Malekith, the Black Blade. Yup, he's my least favorite boss in the whole game. Like I said earlier, I was kind of burned out by the time I got to Godfrey on my first playthrough. Malekith was one of those bosses that contributed to that burnout. The only thing I actually like about this fight is that if you collected all 9 Deathroot and gave it to Garank before meeting him here, his opening dialogue is more personal.
Tarnished. Why wouldst thou? Why? 'Tis no better. Thy fall. Distant
He seems so betrayed, and now he has to reluctantly fight the Tarnished that helped him out. Anyway, the Beast Clergyman phase is not that bad, as long as you have a shield. The first maybe 5 attempts I tried to be cool and dodge every attack, but his most common moves were these multiple swipes I just couldn't seem to fully avoid with the roll. I eventually noticed his attacks barely dented my stamina meter, so my strategy was to just soak up all the hits with my shield, then whack him when he did punishable moves. The first phase wasn't so bad after that. His second phase is the main reason I hate this fight. When he transforms into Malekith, he hits even harder and jumps all over the place. On top of that, most of his attacks inflict this stupid temporary debuff where not only your maximum health is lowered, but you gradually lose health on top of the initial hit you took. It's ridiculous. Like Horaloo, I would die way too soon, then have to fight the first phase again. It wouldn't be so bad if you could just start from the second phase and get a lay of the land, but no, you have to go through the whole Beast Clergyman phase again. What's even worse is that 30-second sprint back to the boss room. Whose idea was it to not put a Stake of Marika there at the entrance? I guess there is that draconic tree sentinel guarding the entrance, but if you killed it, you're left with this unnecessarily long empty path between the closest site of grace and the boss. You could argue, hey, there's no Stake of Marika for Placidusax, and that's true. Not only do you have to go down an elevator, but you have to run past 3 Azula Beastmen, drop down like 6 floating boulders, then lie down in that opening on the floor. It's probably like a minute-long trek, way longer than the one for Malekith. However, that is for an optional boss. I chose to go through that grueling process to reach Placidusax after each death. Malekith is mandatory, so you have to run for 30 seconds. Doing this on top of having to go through the Beast Clergyman phase again is like pouring salt on an open wound. The problem with fights like this in Godfrey's is that the second phase is completely different from the first. Margit, the Crucible Knight, Placidusax, and many others just have enhanced versions of their first phase, where they have maybe 2 or 3 new moves. It doesn't feel too bad dying in the second phase of these fights because you know there's not much new stuff you have to learn. The only way I was able to beat Malekith was by using my Mimic Tear. Even with this cheese, it still took a few tries. My Mimic Tear would die incredibly fast sometimes, and I wasn't sure why. Was Malekith just targeting it too much? or was my Mimic Tier's AI deciding to play stupidly? Probably a mix of both. I was basically relying on pure luck for the second phase. Did I decide to solo him like I did the last 4 bosses I discussed? Nope. I really didn't have the patience for this guy. There's this video I watched a while back where some guy pinned Malenia against every major boss in the game. If you exclude Radahn being able to snipe her when she starts the fight a mile away like the player, only one boss was able to beat Malenia, and it was Malekith. That alone is proof enough this boss is ridiculous. Anyway, dumb fight, dumb second phase, dumb 30-second sprint to the boss room. I didn't really enjoy any of it. Man, remember how I said I'd quickly do a top 5 least favorite bosses? Well, I guess I had just as much to say about them as I did my favorite bosses. Let's just get back to the main topic. My number 1 favorite boss in all of Elden Ring is Radahn of the Golden Order. Radagon's a tough boss, but he isn't overly aggressive like Godfrey's second phase, he doesn't disorient you by stupidly jumping around the room like Malekith, and he's just not as ridiculous as Malenia. He's pretty much as fair as Mohg, but less annoying in my opinion. His attacks are pretty quick, and it feels great dodging them. It's really all on you if you take damage. I never once thought, oh, that's just a stupid attack, if I ever got hit. Actually, that's a lie. He has exactly one stupid attack, his teleport. It's not even an attack. It's just a thing he does that the developers decided to add a hitbox to. It varies between immediate and delayed, which sucks because it's impossible to tell which one he's going to do. It's also really hard to dodge if he teleports right in front of you. If I roll away from him, I get hit by the burst. If I roll into him, I usually get hit by his next attack. What he does after teleporting is also random. I almost always got hit unless he did one of those delayed swings that give you enough time to react. If you got hit by the teleportation burst, Radagon's most likely going to combo you into 1 or 2 more attacks. The only reason his teleport is problematic is because it staggers on contact. If it did damage without interrupting movement, I wouldn't care. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Regardless of the teleportation move, I felt this was a perfect final boss, or at least a perfect start to the final boss sequence. Also, I can't forget to mention the end of the intro cutscene. Phenomenal. When that played, I realized I was playing one of the best games ever made. It's literally the coolest cutscene in the game. I love how there's absolutely no dialogue. He just turns around and looks at you, knowing it's time to fight. I died to Radahn several times, and I never once skipped the cutscene when attempting the fight again. That one part is just too good to skip. It never got old either. Almost every intro cutscene for every other major boss only plays on the first encounter. You never experience these cutscenes again unless you start another playthrough and encounter the boss for the first time there. That's one of the few disappointing things about Elden Ring. The cutscenes are few and far between, but they're all great. Why not allow players to view these cutscenes again? Second phase cutscenes, if bosses even have them, always play. Why not the intro cutscenes? I really wish the developers just always had them play before initiating their corresponding boss fights. It wouldn't be an issue because you'd have the option to skip them. Anyway, this fight is tough, but fair, for the most part. You don't respawn too far away if you die, the boss itself is human-sized so no action is ever forced off screen, and the arena is reasonably sized with no hazards. I think most people would agree. This is one of the best fights in the game. It just hits all the marks of what makes a good boss fight in these kinds of games. I guess if I had to complain about one more thing, it's that you have to fight the Elden Beast immediately after Radahn. If you die to the Elden Beast, you have to fight Radahn again, and that eventually makes him seem like some obstacle preventing you from getting to the actual final fight. Although I really like Radagon's fight, I will admit the magic of his encounter began to dwindle after dying to the Elden Beast enough times. Radahn should have been the final fight. He's way cooler than the Elden Beast. Unless you're a pro, Radahn does drain you enough to the point of making the Elden Beast an annoying second phase. Hell, when I first made it to the Elden Beast phase, I was at half health, forgot to heal, and died literally seconds after the Elden Beast did his first attack. Aside from Radahn just being more fun, his music is also a more fitting final boss track. It switches over to this soft tune for the Elden Beast, and while it is a decent composition, Radagon's just completely overshadowed it for me. Anyway, I continued fighting Radahn normally, but once I had enough of him, I just summoned my Mimic Tear to trivialize his fight and make the Elden Beast more tolerable. Out of respect, however, on my 4th playthrough, I soloed Radahn, then summoned my Mimic Tear. There you have it, my top 5 favorite and least favorite Elden Ring bosses. If you're watching this and played the game, what are your thoughts? Do you think my choices were reasonable? Do you think I'm just a noob? What were your favorite and least favorite bosses? I'd love to know. Elden Ring is a great game. The graphics, music, sound design, voice acting, story, world, characters, gameplay, atmosphere, it's all amazing. Sure, the game isn't perfect and has a fair share of frustrating moments, but I'll admit, overcoming those frustrating moments were satisfying as hell. Succeeding in any challenge the game presents to you is satisfying, but those extra difficult ones are just all the more cathartic when completed. The game's been out for a while now, but I'm sure it'll be played and talked about for a long time.